Web scraping is like when you find a website with a ton of information on it, like cost data for products, and you want to take it off that website and put it into an Excel spreadsheet that is organized in rows and columns. Now, this isn't exclusively for coders. You can do this by writing a script in Python like I did, and I made it open source on GitHub, but you can do this without using code. So I found a low code app, which is basically like block coding, super easy. You don't have to have any coding background, and I'll go over that later in this video. So in this video, we're gonna break down exactly what skills you need in order to understand and do web scraping. Then we're gonna go on into an example that I did in Python using the Python programming language to web scrape. And then finally, we'll go over that low code application that you could also web scrape in, which doesn't require any coding background. If you're new here, my name is Liz. I'm a data science manager at Intel, and I film videos on coding, book reviews, business, everything in your 20s. So if you're into that, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, let's jump into it. Now, to understand web scraping, you really only need to know 3 specific things. And the first one is basic HTML. The next one is CSS, basic CSS, how to use selectors and stuff like that. And then finally, how to inspect a website in order to see the code behind the website. Okay, so we need to understand how the internet is actually coded. So I pulled up here basically an example, and I'm gonna walk you through exactly how HTML and CSS works. So essentially what I have here, I have my coding VS Code on the right hand of my screen, and on the left hand is gonna be my website that I'm gonna code. It's gonna be super basic. So essentially you're gonna need to make 2 different sheets. You're gonna need a style.css, so that is CSS. And then you're gonna need, whatever you wanna call it, .html. So we have an HTML and we have a CSS. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically do this exclamation point and press enter, and that will give us majority of what we need. It basically builds out your website. So give it a second, and then this is what you have here. Now we need to link our CSS because we're gonna code CSS as well. So essentially in the head, we need to put all links and extra information stuff. So I basically copy this off the website every time I do it. So I'm gonna pull it here and I'm gonna paste it. I literally just Googled like how to link CSS to your HTML. It's not that deep. So I actually called mine style. So I'm gonna call this style.css. And then I'm gonna press save really quick just to save it. And now what we're gonna do is we're actually going to add some bulk to this website. We're gonna add HTML elements. And this is something you need to understand in order to understand what web scraping is. So we're gonna add some HTML elements. So I'm gonna add a heading 1. Essentially this is just heading 1, it's the biggest text you can get. So I'm gonna be like, web scraping is cool. So we add that, and then I press Control S, and then I can press Control R to refresh, and bam, okay, that's our website, right? So elements are basically things you can add. So I can add a paragraph element with these little like brackets and go, blah, blah, blah. And you'll notice that when I save it, press Control S and Control R to refresh, I have text that is smaller than the heading. So heading 2 is gonna be smaller than heading 1, so forth, so forth. I'll just add like hello and refresh, cool. So we understand heading 1s are bigger than heading 2s, paragraphs are smaller, blah, blah, blah. You can add all kinds of stuff. You can even add a button if you want. So you can literally type in button and put like, hello, I am a button. Save that, right click, bam, now you have a button. Now you can add JavaScript in order to interact with the website. Like right now when you click the button, nothing happens. But that's because we have no JavaScript. But we don't need JavaScript for web scraping. So essentially, if I want to isolate this and make heading 1 red, I can add a class and call it whatever I want. Red, we'll just do that. And if I go to my my CSS, and I do .red, and I say color, and I make that red, and I save that, and I save this, and I refresh, it turns red. So all you need to know in order to isolate things on a website is basic HTML, which is, hey, do you understand that this is an element, this is an element, this is an element, they're separate elements. And if you want to isolate something, a lot of times they'll use class, IDs, class, whatever you want to call it. and then you can find it in the code of the website and say, oh, they're calling that specific element with class red. And then you can use that in order to scrape the website and pull information off of it. Now I have a website up here, and this is the information I want to pull off the website. Again, we're gonna use what we just learned with the HTML and CSS. You're going to basically hover over this, or click it, right click, inspect, and then bam, all this code pops up, and you can actually look at the code, and we can see right here, it's very small, but it says span is the element, and inside it says class text dash dash black, and then it has the 10.58. So you can see as I hover over, it tells me what part of the website I am touching. Now I just want to grab that part, right? So now you can grab those class names and use them in a Python script and say, look for the class name text dash dash black, and pull that information in. So this is the backbone of the website itself. It's all coded in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So that is what makes up a website, and that's what we're scraping off of it. That's how we can isolate and say, I want anything with a certain class, and pull that information and store it somewhere. Now, if you're wondering how I learned all of this, I actually took a series of courses on SheCodes, and that is how I learned front-end development, which is also known as web development. It's a form of development. It's not back-end. A lot of people say back-end, front-end. It is front-end web development. It's looking at HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You can wrap it in a framework like React, but I learned it on SheCodes because it was super smooth. Like, the teacher was awesome. This isn't sponsored by SheCodes, by the way. I just think it's a really great class because it has homework and solution videos. That is what gets me. So now let's go over an example in Python. So we looked at the HTML, we looked at the CSS. Now you actually need to know a little bit more, which is, I know it's a lot of information, but you need to understand how a code editor works. So VS Code, that is the first thing. The second thing is Python. So you need to kind of know a little bit about Python, and then the libraries we use is going to be Beautiful Soup, Pandas, and Requests. Okay, so this is my code. Now, if you don't know how to code, then this is gonna look like insane, but it's basically 2 loops, and that's why I wanted to include a no-code option, because this is kind of intensive, and I have a whole video where I walk through line by line how to do this, and I linked my GitHub repository below so you can copy and paste it if you want. But this is essentially the entire code. It's intensive. Like, it is, it's 72 lines of code, give or take some lines because, spaces and stuff like that. But you're importing multiple different libraries. You're using multiple different things, like you're going to use f strings, you're going to use loops. I mean, this is pretty intensive for a beginner project. I walked through it in the other video, but this is what I mean by web scraping. And so you can look in here and see, I'm looking for a class with body-1. That's where that whole HTML comes in. That's a div. That's one of the elements in HTML. That's why you have to know a little bit about how websites are coded. Now, when I run the code, this is what I get on the left. The left is what I did with Python. The right is what I'll show you how to do with the no-code version. But you can see it's the same exact thing, and we'll look at this again in a little bit. But on the left, you can see I added a description, a price, a unit, for each of the items. I did this in Python, so when I ran the play button right here in Python, this is what it spit out on the left, which is really exciting because I got all the information that I wanted. Now, if the Python intimidated you, there is a no-code option. Now, I like to do this in Power Automate. It is a Microsoft application, but it basically allows you to do block coding where you can drag and drop things in without actually doing loops, for loops. You don't have to do any variable nameage or anything like that. So it's very exciting, and let's look at it here. So this is what the interface of Power Automate looks like for the desktop application. Now, I use the desktop application because you can do a lot more with it. Now, on the left are little options, and you basically drag and drop. It is as simple as block coding. You literally drag and drop. Inside each thing that you drop is a ton of code in the background that you don't have to deal with. So this is the code that I have. I used the recorder button and literally copied and pasted things in the web browser, and then it recorded my actions and then used it as basically code, and it coded it itself, which is very exciting because I didn't actually have to code at all. So I'm gonna do a completely separate video on exactly how I did this and got it running in Power Automate, because this is really exciting because now you don't need like extensive Python knowledge or anything like that. Like this took me 3 minutes. Now it's also cool because you can download the desktop app for free. And I have a Microsoft 365 account, but if you don't, you still can do this without it. You can do it for free. And this is what they call flows. So each kind of stack of items is called a flow in Power Automate. So you'll sometimes hear people say like, oh, my flow isn't working. They're talking about the flow within Power Automate. Now, I hope this gave you some ideas about what you can use web scraping for, and 2 different options where one's really code heavy and then one's no code, like you absolutely do not need to know any Python background or anything. So that's kind of exciting because you have 2 different options. Now, I didn't go into super detail on each of them because I do separate videos for each of them. So if you want to see those videos, I will link them up here. And if you want to check out SheCodes, how I learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that stuff, I will link it below.